Medical examiner, having looked at the bodies, said no throats were cut at all. The medical examiner says the hostages were apparently killed by large caliber ammunition and shotgun blasts from a distance, which immediately raised the possibility that some of the hostages may in fact have been shot down by the lawmen who broke in to rescue them.
I remember guys getting shot to pieces. I seen a guy, they took his head off and blood was pouring out of the stem where his neck was.
That was Carlos Roche, a surviving inmate of the Attica state prison system. In 2016, he was interviewed by BBC News on the horrors he experienced during the retaking of the correctional facility. He recounted the years of nightmares, the lack of sleep. He later commented, and I quote, "It was a defining moment in my life. It truly made me realize how precious life was." This will be a series about American prison riots and riots throughout the entire world. If you guys enjoy, please like the video and subscribe. The 1971 Attica prison riots have been remembered as one of the most deadly prison riots in American history. It left 43 people dead, 10 of those being prison guards, yet only one of those were the result of inmates. Tensions were built due to racial discrimination for years within the New York prison system. Because of this, black inmates began activism within the prison, but officials continued to deny any demands regarding overcrowding or racially motivated abuse. Shortly after the prison riot, many artists, such as John Lennon, and activists like Angela Davis wrote works in support of the inmates and condemning the official response. Ringleaders such as Frank Smith were still subject to additional abuse, including repeated physical abuse and being locked in solitary confinement for weeks on end. Several days after the uprising's end, doctors treating wounded inmates reported evidence of more abuse from officers. August 10, 1970, there was an uprising at another New York correctional facility, the Manhattan Detention Complex, also named the Tombs, where rioters held 5 guards hostage for 8 hours, until state officials agreed to hear prisoners' grievances and take no punitive action against the rioters. Despite that promise, officials had the primary ringleaders shipped upstate to Ithaca, and many spent months in solitary confinement and were facing criminal charges. July 1971, a group of Attica inmates presented a list of 27 demands regarding improving conditions in Attica to the Commissioner of Corrections, Russell Oswald, and Governor Nelson Rockefeller. The Commissioner did not take any of the actions on the list. The Attica warden, Vincent Mancini, responded by adding additional restrictions to inmates' reading materials and personal belongings. This blatant disrespect for inmates' concerns further raised tensions to a near breaking point within the prison. August 21st, 1971, George Jackson, a member of the Black Panther Party, was shot and killed during an escape attempt at San Quentin Prison. He killed 3 guards and 2 inmates. The day after Jackson's death, at least 700 Ithaca inmates participated in a hunger strike in his honor. September 8th, 1971, one day before the riot, 2 inmates scuffled during their recreational break, and a correctional officer came up to intervene. By the time he got there, one of the inmates had already left, but the officer demanded the remaining inmate to return to his cell. After a short verbal altercation, the inmate hit the officer. Other inmates and guards joined the commotion, and another inmate hit the officer. But before the violence could intensify, Lieutenant Robert Curtis moved to de-escalate the situation. Later that evening, Warden Vincent Mancini ordered the 2 inmates involved in the altercation to be taken to solitary confinement. But when the officer arrived at 5 Company to take the inmates away, it caused a commotion. The other inmates in 5 Company shouted and threw things at the guards, and one inmate, William Oritz, hit an officer with a soup can, resulting in him being assigned to keep lock, or confinement, to his cell. 8:30 a.m., September 9th, 1971, the morning of the riot. The still upset 5 Company demanded officers tell them what would become of Oretz. Officer Gordon Kelly told them he did not know and tried to continue the regular routine. However, as they were heading to breakfast, some inmates managed to open Oretz's cell door and left with him to the mess hall. When command staff found out what had occurred, they decided to return all men of 5 Company to their cells after breakfast. However, they did not inform all the correctional officers, and when the officers led the inmates towards the correctional area after breakfast, both officers and inmates were surprised to find the doors locked. The inmates believed they were about to be punished, and a melee broke out, which resulted in chaos as some inmates attacked the guards and others tried to flee. The chaos spread to nearby companies of the inmates, and the uprising began. During the initial rebellion, several guards and inmates were injured. Officer William Quinn would die in the hospital 2 days later of injuries sustained during the initial riot. By noon on September 9th, approximately 3.5 hours after violence began, correctional officers and police controlled about half of its prison, while 1,281 of Ithaca's approximately 2,200 inmates controlled the other half, including D-Yard, which would become the main focus of the riot in the coming days. They also controlled the main central control room, referred to as Times Square. Inmates held approximately 42 officers and civilians hostage. September 10th, 1971. Prisoners elect representatives, and civilian observers are permitted to enter D-Yard to aid in negotiations. Frank Big Black Smith, who passed away July 31st, 2004, who was one of the representatives elected, was the head of security, keeping hostages and observers safe. Additionally, in ardent order, 21-year-old Elliot James L.D. Barkley was a strong force during the negotiations, speaking eloquently to the inmates, camera crews, and outside at home. Barkley, just a few days from his scheduled release at the time of the uprising, was killed during the recapturing of the prison. September 10th, 1971. Attorney William Kunstler arrives at the Attica State Correctional Facility to discuss grievances with the rebellious inmates. Inmates had asked to see Kunstler as well as current national representative of the Nation of Islam, Louis Farrakhan, but the latter declined. September 11th, 1971, Black Panther Party leader Bobby Seale is flanked by state police as he enters the Attica State Correctional Facility. Seale entered the maximum security prison to talk to inmates just before it was learned that Officer William Quinn died as a result of injuries suffered 2 days earlier during the takeover. September 12th, 1971. Governor Nelson Rockefeller refuses to visit Attica after being asked by the hostages, prisoners, representatives, civilian observers, and finally Commissioner Oswald. Oswald and the governor resolved to retake the prison by force if their next demand to release the hostages is refused. As negotiations deteriorate, the prisoners begin fortifying D-Yard and the prison control center. On the night of September 12, 1971, plans were drawn up to retake the prison by force. Members of the team of observers argued for Oswald to deliver to inmates one final appeal for a statement before the forcible retaking. Oswald agreed, but was instructed not to phrase the demand as an ultimatum, as Rockefeller did not want to let the inmates know that the assault was beginning at 8:25 a.m. on Monday, September 13th. Oswald gave the inmates a statement directing them to release the hostages and accept the offer of settlement within an hour. However, he did not tell them that the negotiations had ended and he would not take the prison back by force if they refused, even stating, "I want to continue negotiations with you." The inmates rejected his offer, and as it appeared to them as though Rockefeller remained opposed to their demands, the mood among the inmates deteriorated. The the morning of September 13th, 1971. In preparation for prison authorities potentially taking back the prison by force, inmates dug defensive trenches and fashioned crude battlements out of metal tables and dirt. They fortified the Times Square Prison Command Center as well. After Oswald denied their last request, the inmates brought 8 correctional officers to the catwalk on top of the command center and surrounded them with inmates armed with homemade weapons. According to surviving inmates, they did not actually intend to kill the hostages, but rather to use them as insurance. Shortly after the inmates were positioned on the catwalk, Oswald gave the order to begin the retaking. Oswald later commented on an interview on that decision. He said the following: "On a much smaller scale, I think I now have some feeling on how Truman must have felt when he decided to drop the A-bomb." 9:46 a.m., September 13th, 1971. All personnel was utilized, from NYPD to the Bureau of Investigations. Correctional officers opened fire into smoke grenades. Some troopers were using shotguns loaded with buckshot, causing unnecessary damage to non-resistant inmates or hostages stuck in the way. By 10:05 a.m., less than 20 minutes after entering the prison, law enforcement had fully secured the facility, at the cost of 9 hostages and 29 prisoners' lives. September 9th, 1971, 4 days before his death. Elliot James Barkley said the following: "We are men. We are not beasts, and we do not intend to be beaten or driven as such. The entire prison populace, and that means each and every one of us here, have set forth to change forever the ruthless brutalization and disregard for lives of the prisoners here and throughout the United States. What has happened here is but the sound before the fury of those who are oppressed. We will not compromise on any terms except for those that are agreeable to us. We've called upon all the conscientious citizens of America to assist us in putting an end to the situation that threatens the lives of not only us, but each and every one of you as well." If you made it all the way to the end, thank you very much for watching. If there's any other prison stories you'd like to hear, just write them in the comments, and please like and subscribe. See you next time.